The Hilton sale is on. Now through September 29th, you can save up to 20% on stays this fall and beyond. Long weekends, last-minute getaways, holiday gatherings. There's a Hilton stay for all of them. More moments, more experiences, more destinations. Now 20% off for a limited time because it matters where you stay. Don't wait. Book by September 29th and save up to 20% at Hilton.com. Terms apply. Hilton for the stay.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Hello again, witches, seekers, and friends, and welcome to the Fat Feminist Witch podcast, the show where we do a little ranting, raving, and wand waving. I'm your host, Paige Vanderbeck, and together we're going to explore magic and spirituality, social justice, the psychic realm, and truly modern witchcraft. Hello again, witches, seekers, and friends, and thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope you're all having a good summer, or just a tolerable one. I've been sick so many times, I feel like a Victorian orphan. Like, I lost my voice 3 times. The temperature was dangerously high almost every day, and a sinkhole opened up in the street right in front of my house. Really trying not to take it personally. So it's been an inside summer for me. I am thrilled that fall is on the way. It's still sunny out. Thank God, right? Like, it's the little things like that make you not take sinkholes personally. So today I am talking about wild energy and how it presents in our different kind of environments, like the city or the country. You know, are you a cottagecore witch, or are you practicing in a concrete jungle? And do you think there's a difference? Today we're focusing on what it means to live in the city and how to connect with wild magic of nature when you live someplace that can feel very disconnected. First, let's define what I mean by these different environments. So we have city, and then rural or country life, and the wild. The city is very densely populated. Even if its population is on the lower side, it could be a small city. Everyone is very physically close to one another. A city might have lots of green space, like in New York with Central Park, which is huge, or it might not. But I think a distinction here is that cities don't have a lot of green space that is used for agriculture or just left on its own to return to its kind of default natural state. Even empty fields are usually plowed or controlled in some way. Country environments are less densely packed with people, but they are very specifically shaped and inhabited by people. This is like farm communities and smaller towns that aren't close or connected to the big city nearby. Things like suburbs are sort of in between the city and the country. They're a liminal space, you know? Then we have the actual wilderness, a place where some humans live, but they don't tend to live in large connected settlements. They might have their own farms, but there's no like industrial farming here unless you count logging. A remote cabin or a home in the woods or up on a mountain or out on a small island where there's no one driving by unless they got lost. This is the wild, the wilderness. And this is where the geography of the area, the look of the area, is entirely dictated by nature. I'm not going to say which one is more magical. You know, if you live in a country space or a wild space versus a city, because any answer I would give you would be complete bullshit. None of them are better or more magical. They are just different, as are the people who practice magic in those places. I live in a mid-sized city now, but I also lived in a suburb for a few childhood years, and in farm country while I was a teenager. I've also lived in much larger cities, all in Canada, but so I've lived in a few different types of places, but my experiences are still not universal. it's just given me a chance to meditate on how those different environments and lifestyles contributed to my witchy identity. The specific cities I've lived in and visited have also played a role in my practice's kind of general evolution. Maybe when you think of a witch, you see, this really cool person in like a famous or a big sprawling city. They're shopping at one of the million witchy shops they have access to. Maybe they're growing magical plants, but like on their balcony, and they're sitting out there soaking up the moonlight, drinking a fancy drink with their house cat. Maybe you have more of an old school kind of image, someone who lives alone outside of the city, or even right out in the wild in a home that is kind of rustic, surrounded by green space or forest, somewhere they might not be seen, but that they can see every single star in the sky. That country cottage witch image certainly has a monopoly on how people think of us. I can't tell you how many times I've had witches tell me that their dream for the future is to move out of the city, plant a garden, raise animals, stargaze like a pro, and make everything from scratch, with the obvious implication that this is the way a witch lives, that their practice is going to, finally come into what it was meant to be. Like, what they're doing now in the city is kid stuff compared to what's going to happen when they leave the city behind. And there's definitely nothing wrong with wanting all of that for yourself. But how many people are out there, holding themselves back or putting limitations on their practice because they don't or can't live that particular type of lifestyle? Likewise, how many people who do live like this are judging others and believing them or their lives to be less magical or less natural? There's no denying that right-wing ideology also thrives in rural places and has for a very long time. My entire area was really shaped heavily by what's called white flight, which is when white, usually affluent people start leaving neighborhoods or entire cities because, a black family moved in next door, or an apartment building with, a low rental price is being built nearby. Racism and classism created the suburbs. And in my experience, it's still in a lot of those suburbs. If you live in a city, you have more opportunities to connect with witchy people from diverse backgrounds. You have more access to libraries and to schools with diverse teachings. And you're much closer to a lot of the political goings-on that you can get involved with. Witchcraft is a path of revolution and change, of fighting for people that society works hard to leave out, and of finding magic in everything. If you follow a path that heavily features finding an in-person community, that's also much more available in cities. Sexism also factors into all of these things. Witchcraft needs to be anti-sexism of all kinds. If you've been on the internet ever in your life, but especially in the last couple of years, you might have seen the trad wife trend, which has got to be one of the grossest things that I've seen for a very long time. If you're unfamiliar, trad wives are a big social media trend. It sounds so silly to say that because trad wife means traditional wife, but they're a big social media trend for living a traditional lifestyle, which means fitting into traditional gender roles in pretty over-the-top ways. Admittedly, ways that feel performative. It's like, I think of it as like drag. It feels to me like, they're playing as a trad wife, but like, it's all so over the top that it's like, okay, well, I know you're not like an actual trad wife. It's performative. Most of these people are not showing you their modest apartment in the middle of the city. They show you a homestead, and they talk about how rewarding it is to prioritize their husbands, and his needs and family life, and how gross it all is that all, the liberal women here in cities eat processed food and breathe polluted air. Many also have gardens and small farms that allow them to have fresh food, which sounds absolutely delicious. No hate. Because of this, it's unfortunately pretty common for them to campaign against anything from like processed food to vaccines. Trad wives are, admittedly a pretty Christian phenomenon, but if you live in rural places, those are your neighbors. And you don't have to be Christian or to be right-wing. there was plenty of really creepy right-wing shit woven into, the New Age movement that a lot of us witches kind of move in and out of, especially where it concerns living naturally. Right-wing ideology really boils down to, I don't give a shit about other people. So the fact that homesteading in a single-income household is a massive privilege that is simply not possible for millions of people is just irrelevant. Those of us in the city and to the left politically are, according to them, living in an unnatural way and are cut off from our roots and our true purpose. It's bullshit, but tons of people believe it. One of the worst things that's come from this trad wife and even, cute cottagecore thing is this belief that humanity and nature are separate. That you have to literally leave the city or even your home to interact with nature. And that if you don't, you are living a life that is intentionally away from nature. You can't leave nature. We live here. Nature is everywhere. Literally, you breathe it in and you drink it and you eat it and you cuddle with it at night and smile at it on the street. You could be surrounded in all directions by concrete and man-made structures, and you are still not outside of nature. Human-made things are natural. But I know that when people say things like this, what they really mean is they want to get to a place that feels separate from their regular life, the regular types of energy they encounter every day. They want to see and smell and hear more plants and animals. They want air that isn't recycled, light from the sun, and almost always they want silence. They want a story, a work of art and inspiration. And there's nothing wrong with any of that. In fact, that's a good thing. There's tons of research out there showing that these intentional flights into the wild are great for mental health, lowering your stress, cardiac health. They keep your heart healthy. And even sleep. If you get time outside during the day, you're more likely to sleep better at night, which is wild. Even 20 minutes outside apparently helps your sleep. Going outside, immersing yourself in some sort of natural environment helps you regulate yourself. You'll notice that I said intentional flights out into the wild, and that's because that is something that's a bit more difficult for us who live in the city, intentionally leaving. And that makes it very impactful. I asked my Patreon group recently about how living in the city or outside of it impacts their witchcraft. And everyone had great answers, but one person said something that really stuck with me. They said, finding the time and space to connect to the wild is very intentional for them. It takes time, it takes effort, it might take research or money. If you can't walk out your door into a field of wildflowers or a forest or a lake or what have you, you have to seek those places out. There's no taking these kinds of spaces for granted when they're such a gift to experience. Any sort of witchcraft that you might want to do outside also has this added energy of intention. Not that the country is, 100% safe. We had coyotes in my backyard when I lived out there. But even something as simple as sitting outside on a full moon and looking up, can be kind of dangerous depending on where you live. Socially, being seen doing any kind of magic outside in public can also be very dangerous. Privacy is a precious resource of the city, and personally, it's something that's always been hard for me. My witchcraft feels very private, and the thought of people watching me and especially judging me is very distracting. It's uncomfortable. It's not even like, oh, I care what they think about me, but it's very distracting. I have a hard time not thinking about it. I have a backyard, but there is not a single corner of it that can't be seen by multiple neighbors, not to mention the people that live in my house. There's always someone here. So spots like the porch are also not private. I'm never really alone, so it's hard to feel comfortable practicing in a formal way outside, or even, in the house outside of my bedroom, right? That means that when I do, I am fighting against fears and discomfort, and I'm taking a chance because I feel that interacting directly with nature and wilderness is important, is helpful to me in that moment. And it's a very powerful kind of energy. I know how it affects me, and I know that it has a very clearing effect on my mind. I go outside to think. I go for walks to think. I go to a very quiet park that's about a 25-minute walk from here to a very secluded spot. And I go there to think because there is less distraction. And that can really, really help when you're practicing. You have to focus, right? Many city witches cannot walk outside. They can't just pick a plant or grass. So they put effort, time, and money into intentionally going out to find herbs and plants to use in their spells and their rituals. They might walk quite a ways to a park to gather like acorns or seashells or flowers, things that are much more plentiful in rural settings. Every step and minute of that walk pours power and energy into those items. And it also expresses gratitude to the earth for making them available. They are valuable because you are putting in the time and effort to get them. That doesn't make it more or less magical than if it's easier to get, but it does just make it a little bit different. I love the city, and my city-specific lifestyle has never actually hindered my ability or my inspiration to be a witch. There are some things I miss about my life in a rural area, country type area. It was like a smaller farm town outside of the city that I now live in. And we were right near, marshland and the river. I miss the air. I miss that marshland along the Detroit River. I was surrounded on the other sides by fields and forest. It didn't always smell great. Like the field behind my house was often used to grow cabbage. And they just leave old cabbage there and like cabbage rotting in the summer heat. That is what hell smells like for sure. But other than those moments, it smelled very green and alive. It cooled off so much at night that a window fan felt the same as air conditioning does here in the city. So, you're not breathing a lot of recycled air. I also miss the animals. Those coyotes. I miss the sound of coyotes howling and playing at night. It is such a gift. It's so funny and sweet, and it's also very spooky, which is, great. I had owls that lived in a big tree out front, and seeing them suddenly and soundlessly, they're so creepy, swoop down in front of me. I mean, it never stopped being amazing. There were beavers and mink out there. Have you ever seen a mink? It's like an otter and a ferret had a baby, and it is exactly as cute as it sounds. I could see these like on a regular day. It's so wild to think about now. I could walk 30 minutes, which is a short walk out there, in any direction, and I could see horses, cows, chickens, ducks, sheep, and goats. I really, really wanted to pet the sheep, and I could not because they were behind a fence, and it still makes me sad. But I could see them. The moon and the stars were so bright that sometimes it felt like daytime in the middle of the night. My backyard was so illuminated. I could have bonfires. I could swim in natural water, and I could walk to the natural water. When I was alone, I was really, really alone. But I never felt lonely because you're supposed to be alone in remote areas. That feels normal, right? What I couldn't do, though, was buy clothes, walk to a grocery store. I couldn't meet up with any local pagans and witches. I had to leave the town and come to the city where I live now to do that. There was no public transit of any kind. There wasn't even like a Greyhound or a train station. Like, I can't drive, so I felt trapped. It was an uncomfortable feeling. On top of that, this town was populated mainly by very affluent white people, and even just in terms of magic, that really limits what you can learn and what you can experience. Also limits the amount of people I want in my life, because racism was very commonplace there. When you're not, even with kids, when you aren't around people of different races, you start to think everyone's supposed to be white. So that is really, really difficult because before I moved there, I lived in the city where absolutely that was not the case for me. It took a hot minute after leaving that environment for me to stop thinking of my city life as less natural, less nature focused. The trick was to change my definition of nature and of connecting with it. Something about me that has never, ever, and will never change is that I am a wanderer. I wander like crazy. A friend once told me that I think with my feet. And as I mentioned earlier, that's one of the most wonderful things I've ever heard because it's very, very accurate. I do a lot of thinking while I walk. When I wandered through the suburbs, I looked at houses, gardens, yards, small parks full of kids. There's no stores, no big buildings, no busy streets. and everything kind of looked the same. I lived in the suburbs, between the city and the country. So, I went, I like worked my way up to a wilder area, which is kind of funny to think about. So everything kind of looked the same. I searched desperately in my suburban neighborhood for original things, like, a house with wine grapes growing along the fence, or a brightly painted door that probably pissed off tons of their boring neighbors. Someone who took holiday decorating to extreme levels. There wasn't a lot to look at, but the actual walk was kind of interesting because a suburban neighborhood is very contained, it's very insular, which makes it kind of a maze. It's not like a grid pattern, it's a maze. It was almost impossible to find landmarks, to know which direction you're walking in. It was definitely hard to determine if you've walked the same street over and over. I got lost. I'm not someone who gets very lost when I'm walking all the time. I can usually find a marker of where I am and where I'm supposed to be going. But I got lost. And it was a safe place to get lost because it was quiet, it was well lit, it was contained. You knew if you were leaving the neighborhood entirely. I was fully and completely in the moment. This is why I described it as a liminal space. The country had a lot of things to look at, like the super cute little mink. But it's not a place that you want to get lost. Nighttime goes real hard out there. It would suddenly be pitch black and the temperature would drop so far that your lips, it gets cold enough to turn your lips a little bit purple like in July. It's possible in the country to accidentally walk so far that you cannot get home. Actually, it's possible in both places. If you leave your suburban neighborhood, who knows what's outside the neighborhood? It's not always like an easy suburb to find your way back through, right? In both of those environments, I relied on having friends spread out around town, friends with parents who knew that kids would be dropping by and not leaving for a long time. You really had to trust people. Living somewhere where everyone knows each other has its downsides, has a lot of downsides, but that idea of hospitality, it's a big part of the culture there, especially with kids. Wandering in the country requires skills like navigation, knowing the time based on the position of the sun, which is a super cool skill, by the way. But more than anything, you had to know your limits and how and when to ask for help. You had to be able to recognize if a house was friendly, especially if it's the only one around. I've seen the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. You gotta be careful. Also, you need bug repellent. I am a gourmet meal to anything that likes blood. It's genuinely gross. So wandering out in the country was often it could be a really horrible experience, but I did it anyways. I can't help it. Wandering the city combines a lot of elements of both of these, other experiences while providing something that neither of them really, really did. Novelty. A suburb never changes. A farm town and a 130-year-old house that I lived in, none of that ever changed. Couldn't really leave either. I felt cut off from a world that I knew was changing fast and in big ways. Out there. The town was very quiet and very still, and that is lovely, has a lot of benefits, but it's also kind of stifling. The city is open, it's moving, it's changing. People everywhere are different. Stores and restaurants, they open and close. They go out of business completely. New buildings and monuments are being built. Roads are constantly getting redesigned. New street art pops up every single day. People are moving in and out all the time. So even if you walk the same city streets every day, it will constantly evolve. I can take a walk that brings me past gardens and parks one day, past the beach another, and then through downtown surrounded by concrete and, street art and strangers. I can take a bus to Detroit, although not anymore. They've actually canceled the bus that takes me from Windsor to Detroit. I'm extremely angry about it, but I used to be able to take a bus to Detroit and wander a city in a whole other country, which is wild, for the afternoon. I can wander into bars and restaurants. I can try new foods or drinks or whatever. I can meet new people. I can look at a lot of art. We have lots of street art where I live, just a ton. I go for tree walks. I do this in every season. Magnolia season this year was really wild. We have a particular type of magnolia tree. They're pink magnolias, and they're very lovely. They smell great, but they are a different kind of tree and flower than you get in the South. Southern magnolias are a little different. I love the smell here. I follow it around the city. You know, I kind of sniff the air, and if I smell magnolia coming down a street, I'll just walk in that direction and I wander around. This year I was in a neighborhood I don't normally walk through. I just kind of wandered in and I smelled magnolia, but it smelled different. It didn't smell like my magnolia, but I knew that's what kind of smell I was smelling. So I wandered and I found a random southern magnolia tree, which I've never, seen here in person, on a tiny dead-end residential street, just growing in a tiny little yard, as if it wasn't the most incredible, like, intoxicating smell that I've ever smelled in my entire life. It was this total surprise, just in a random place. I'm not going to find that in the country or in a suburb where it's, 3 varieties of tree all the way through and none of them have flowers or fruit because it's messy, In the city, I've gotten veggies from community gardens in exchange for, a little bit of helping carry them home or, helping pour a bag of mulch or something like that. During mulberry season, I go to spots to pick them and I meet lovely grandmothers doing the same. I can help them get berries from the high branches and they help me out. I can pick grape leaves with aunties who teach me Italian and Greek recipes. Always fabulous. There's an African grocery store on the corner near my house. There's a Mexican grocery store, an Italian grocery store, and a Polish butcher, all within a 20-minute walk. I am often by myself, alone, but I never really feel disconnected. The magic here is very, very human, but it's no less natural or amazing. Wandering the suburbs taught me to let go of needing to control things. The country taught me to pay attention, not to underestimate the power of nature, and that I have to try and trust other people, and that often that can work out. And wandering the city taught me to open up to change and to people who are different from me. They all showed me different ways to be wild and to exist in wild places. Something that's true no matter which of these environments you find yourself in is that the actual place and its plants and animals and people, they all make a difference. Some things, magical and otherwise, are sort of universal, but many are not. Animals, seasons and climate, available plants, local human cultures, and even things like infrastructure all contribute to the local energy of a place. I mentioned earlier that the different towns and cities I've lived in all had sort of a different magical signature, I guess you could say. Windsor, where I live now, has always featured kind of hands-on pagan practitioners. Many are old-school Wiccans, or from similar 20th century like magical religions that were very popular in the 1970s, which is a very significant decade for the culture here. Our proximity to Detroit and our place along the Underground Railroad also means we have lots of Black and Southern practitioners. So you find some African traditional magic kind of sprinkled all over the place. Economically, it's long been a very blue-collar area, though that is changing right now. But the area has always been propped up by the auto industry. That's what we did. So literal hands-on magic, things you build and assemble, physical things, are all a big part of the local spiritual culture in my experience. By contrast, Vancouver, British Columbia, which is right on the western coast in the Pacific Northwest, had a much more New Age vibe, clearly influenced by what we call Eastern spiritual practices, so things like Hinduism, Buddhism, Shinto. And this makes sense because the Asian population there is huge. There are yoga studios just about everywhere, all sorts of different kinds of yoga studios, right? You have lots of people who follow these religions and practices in like authentic ways, who came from their country of origin. And you also have the like stereotypical kind of affluent yoga people who are just working out. All good, but there is a lot of them. The magic I found there is less hands-on and more meditative. Then again, there's not a lot of like sitting around in Vancouver. People there are constantly moving. So like hiking and nature walking and wandering around the small little cities in the greater Vancouver area, that's where witchy people connect. I rarely met people like right in downtown Vancouver. It was like one of the small little towns, or like we would meet up in a big park or in a forested area or what have you.
Switch to Shiseido Benefiance Wrinkle Smoothing Eye Cream and discover why people are calling it the best eye cream. A powerhouse formula that targets 5 types of eye area wrinkles. 96% of users saw reduced wrinkles and diminished dark circles after just 7 days. Shop Shiseido Benefiance Wrinkle Smoothing Eye Cream at Sephora and discover how change can happen in the blink of an eye. Consumer tested by 110 women.
They're also right on the ocean. So any water-based magic is slightly different there than it is here in the Great Lakes. You have all different animals. Saltwater and lake water and Lake Detroit River water, they're all very different types of water. You also have a different water-based climate. I live in a very swampy area where they live in a very rainy area, and you wouldn't think those are very different, but they're so different. Just ask my skin. It hated it. Both of these places are also home to very different indigenous groups with very different practices and a lot of different kinds of visibility. I found the indigenous people in the Vancouver area, they're very visible and they have lots of like public things going on all the time. Whereas here you have to leave the city to find more of the indigenous like events and stuff. Then when you go to the east coast of Canada, places like Newfoundland and Nova Scotia, you'll find lots more Celtic practitioners, also French. There's even a good number of people there who speak Gaelic. There is a Gaelic College of Celtic Arts and Crafts, which is incredibly cool. Some of the traditional like Appalachian and Cajun styles of practice are also found there in the French towns, thanks to a historical event called the expulsion of the Acadians, which led to many of them moving to Louisiana, which is how you have, the Cajun cultures down there. Fun fact, the most famous leader of the Acadians, Beausoleil, does have living ancestors in the U.S., including Louisiana, and one of them is Beyonce. Just a really neat, weird little fact. A city that I like that is about 2 hours from me, London, is full of druids. Many Pagan Pride Day events there are super druidic and kind of Celtic in nature. And that's because London is not on the water like I am. It's not surrounded by lakes. It's surrounded by forest. It's the forest city. And druids do love them some trees, right? Interesting. Toronto is multi-purpose. You got everything there, everyone. Old stuff and new stuff. Just a whole bunch in Toronto. If you want to find witchy people, they're on every corner. They're doing all sorts of different things. Now, this is just a small cross-section of Canada. And I mean literally cross-section because I do not tend to go super far north. Not because it sucks. Not because it's not beautiful. Not even because of the cold. But it's because I don't drive. And that is just a much wilder area. If you want to get somewhere wild in Canada, driving north is the way to do that. And I mean, you can drive all the way north, but getting north is where you are going to find our wildest places. And when you go that far north, there are tons of amazing indigenous people that live and pray in completely different, really interesting ways. So no matter where I go here, magic is going to be a little bit different. The energy feels different. I don't like saying tools when it comes to living things like plants, but all of the things that you would use to support your magical intentions are all going to be just a little bit different. So every time that I've lived in a different part of Canada, my own practice and the other witchy and magical people that I connect with are very different. And if I had never gone to these other places, moved or visited, and done these different types of magic, I honestly think I might not still be a practicing witch. My blue-collar area wasn't fully right-wing conservative, but it was definitely right of center. It's a real pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of vibe around here. It's kind of people who might say like socially liberal but fiscally conservative, and liberal is just bullshit in that sentence, but I digress. It's also a place that has not changed very much in my lifetime. The reason the 1970s are so are still so prevalent here is because things kind of stopped changing so much in the 70s, where it got a little bit slower, and 70s music and style and culture. I mean, in my years in high school, in the early 2000s, we wore bell bottoms and we listened to, 70s classic rock, and we didn't have cell phones, and like we had like bush parties and smoked weed in the woods. Like it felt like the late 70s here. And that's kind of a thing here. It is in Detroit too, but Detroit was a little bit cooler in the 70s, so that worked out. If the magic that I saw and knew about was just the stuff here, if it had never evolved, I probably would have left it behind. In her book, City Witchery, Lisa Marie Basile, who I love, talks about creating a city grimoire specific to the place you live or are visiting, and that this is the most important tool in working with local magic. And she's 100% right. So here's where we get to our practical stuff. I only have one practical piece of advice if you want to get in touch with the kind of wilder magic, the natural local magic of wherever it is that you are living. I used to buy these small pocket-sized, or like moleskin notebooks. They were, leather bound or whatever. They're very tiny. They're pocket-sized, that were very specific to a city. It was printed on the outside. Vancouver, Toronto, whatever. They had maps and transit information printed at the front. Lots of local things you might need, like emergency phone numbers in case you're from like a whole other continent, locations of like, the embassies and whatnot. So it had practical information already included right at the beginning. And then, you have tons of blank paper for writing. You have little pockets to stick souvenirs in. They strap together with a really good elastic that still exists, even though my books are very old. I still have a nice, good collection of them. What I've written in them is some of it's mundane things and just journaling. I would sit down and I would write. But I do witchy things kind of everywhere I go. So I cataloged every witch store that I went to. If I went to a place and I felt some sort of interesting kind of energy, I would write that down, and I would write about why I feel that way. I would sit there in that place and record it. I wrote down memories of people I met, instant photos, business cards, whatever other scraps of paper I considered important, because I'm a real ticket stub kind of gal. I have an autograph of a pagan musician that I love, S.J. Tucker, and some little stickers and things that they gave me in my little Vancouver notebook, and that's like, geez, that's more than 15 years old now, and it's all still in there, and it's fun to look through. Now, admittedly, I never thought of these as grimoires. I thought of them as, my own personal little travel guide, and I happen to be witchy, so there's witchy things in there. But when I read City Witchery, I realized that is exactly what those are. And I did that by accident, but you can obviously do this intentionally. Now, Moleskine doesn't make these books anymore, which is a real bummer for me. I had to buy a really old Boston one on eBay when I went to Salem, because I was like, I gotta complete my collection. But you can make this yourself, with a small notebook that I recommend has like really hard covers. So that you can write wherever you are. You don't want something flimsy, with a really good elastic that holds it closed so you can stick things into it. Before you go to a place, you can print out or draw maps and guides that are the right size to fit your book so that you can get around the city. Another benefit of that is that people don't really see you opening up a big map or something, or constantly on your phone, which sometimes can make you a target. So if you're just looking through a little book, that's a little bit, low key, which is cool. Write down phone numbers, addresses, anything you might need. Where's your embassy? All that kind of important stuff. And then the rest is your grimoire. And this is not a special notebook that you want to save for a special occasion. Just write anything in it while you're sitting in a park or at, the McDonald's or Starbucks with the good Wi-Fi. That's the thing about local or city magic, or the magic of a certain place. This is our everyday stuff. This is not theoretical. It's real. So whatever it is that comes to mind that you are feeling when you're in a place, in a moment, that is what you want to record. If you're just visiting a city, you'll no doubt have a lot of blank space, and you can get kind of fancy when you get home, and you can get, your scrapbooking or your art supplies or whatever. But when you're there, grab your little book and wander around. Open yourself up to the city through your physical senses and your non-physical ones, your metaphysical ones, your emotional senses. What do you feel? What do you see? What do you smell? Do you have an initial feeling like, I could live here? Or, oh gosh, I stick out like a sore thumb. There are certain cities where I've been where I instantly have a feeling I can only describe as a little bit like home. A little bit like home. When I went to Halifax for the first time, I immediately oh, okay, I could do this. I felt super comfortable. By contrast, when I first got to Vancouver, I did not have that feeling. I immediately was like, oh no, maybe this wasn't the best place for me to move. Gotta make the best of it, right? That's a thing I record in my books. Look at plants. I like to steal a leaf or a flower and press it into the book. I'll research them later and see what kind of spells might look different if I'm using that versus something else in my city that might be equivalent. I wander into witch stores. I write little reviews. Do that. Visit museums and historical sites and stuff and learn about the indigenous and the other older cultures that have contributed to the place as it is today. And that, not just when you're visiting. Do this with your own hometown. Where you live is unique, and so is its magic. Wander. Explore, ask questions, go in directions that you never have before, through neighborhoods you've never noticed, into natural areas you've never even seen. Become acquainted with the spirit and soul of the land that you're on, and consider how it has shaped you and your practice. It is not all sunshine and rainbows everywhere. Life is hard. My city has gotten expensive. Mental health and mental illness and homelessness are at crisis levels. And when things change all the time, they often change in ways you don't like. Like my tunnel bus. I have to sacrifice. I have to give up. I have to accept defeat. I have to be afraid sometimes. And in those moments, I have to fight. But those things are a big part of what makes me who I am. And I wouldn't trade them for all the peaceful silence and the safe 130-year-old houses or adorable little mink frolicking on the side of a little canal in the marsh. God, I miss those little guys. That's the thing about the city. There is no ignoring the darkness, the shadow. Sure, some people in the city can close their fancy curtains and ignore the problems and the plight of others, but most of us cannot. As a witch, you should also not want to. Balance is essential. Light isn't as beautiful if you don't know what it's like to live without it. Avoiding everything that is negative or scary or that you think is, scuffing up your aura or whatever, cuts you off from a huge chunk of the world. It cuts your magic off. It limits it. Not only are you missing out, but the effects of your magic just aren't going as far. If you're constantly manifesting money and hoarding it like a dragon, you are actively hurting other people. If you're constantly banishing things, nothing new and unexpected can come through. If you never see the ways other people connect with the planet, worship their gods, make their magic, you will not evolve. You will stagnate. The magic will truly become mundane in the worst way possible. Just like the intention required by us city folks to wander into somewhere wild, living outside the city requires you to be intentional in how you connect with the wild energy present in civilization. If you're using any of these places to escape from life's shadows, you're running away from what it means to be a witch. Or you're trying to, anyway. Personally, I think we as witches bring a lot of that with us. We increase the presence of magic in any environment that we enter, and we see it more because we are looking for it. The wildest and most magical place, it's always going to be wherever the witches are. What changes is whether or not you choose to see it and to interact with it. Witchcraft has always been the energy and the essence of the wild, a chaotic force that women and other people society ignores have harnessed to take back control of their bodies, of their lives, of their futures. In my next few episodes, we're going to be talking about wildness, a little bit about rage, ecstatic spirituality, and how these are the seeds all of modern witchcraft sprouted from. I said this online and it's become like a mantra for me, but we're in our maenad era. We are out for blood and we are ready to drag society kicking and screaming back out into the wild. So thank you so much for tuning into today's episode of The Fat Feminist Witch. It is always a pleasure to share a little bit of magic with you. Most of today's episode was personal in nature, but I did also use a couple of books for research that I think you would really like, especially if you want to connect more with like city type magic. So the first is City Witchery by Lisa Marie Basile from 2021. And the other is City Magic by Christopher Penczak, which was originally published in 2001. So it's a classic now. If it was a song, it would be on the classic rock station, apparently. So I hope you all have a wild and witchy, beginning of fall. The autumn equinox is on the 22nd. It's coming up. And then you'll join me here again for the next episode of The Fat Feminist Witch. If you want to learn more about me and the podcast or check out one of my books, you can find all of that at thefatfeministwitch.ca. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads. I would not be able to do the show at all without my amazing Patreon community, who not only offer financial support, but also provide me with great feedback and inspiration for future episodes. They helped me with this one in a lot of different ways. Everyone had a different opinion. Everybody lives in a different place. And it was really great to hear, how magic presents in their home environment in a bunch of different ways. So if you would like to join the gang, you can do that at patreon.com/thefatfeministwitch, where there are free and paid membership options. Finally, if you'd like to rock some Fat Feminist Witch t-shirts, hoodies, tote bags, coffee cups, whatever, you can find all of that on my new online shop at thefatfeministwitch.dashery.com. I'm going to be putting the link in the description. And right now I'm having a Fat Witch Fall sale, and everything is going to be discounted